Welcome to Community Matters on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Jay Fidell. Today, we'll talk about how to build an opera season. Where exactly do we start? Our guest for the show is Andrew Morgan, General Director and CEO of Hawaii Opera Theater. Welcome to the show, Andrew.
Thanks so much for having me, Jay. It's always a pleasure to chat with you.
So, just in the way of framing things, I feel, a lot of people feel, that everybody in Hawaii should follow the arts. A great state requires great art, and great art makes a great state, especially opera produced by Hawaii Opera Theater. It improves our lives and our community, and we can better appreciate and enjoy its productions if we know the backstage tasks and challenges that are involved. And that's why we're here today. I want to take you through the steps involved in establishing an opera season. But before I do that, I want to talk about the top-down news. So you have been getting federal money. How has Trump affected that?
Well, we just recently received news that the all funds from government funding for the arts and humanities have been frozen until further notice. So we have an application in for a production to support a production for next season, our 25-26 season. And so that's in limbo right now. We had one currently for this current season for Stuck Elevator, which we did in October, but I believe we got paid for that. I don't know. I have to confirm with my director of development. I know we submitted the final report on that fabulous production, but hopefully we'll get the money from that.
That was fabulous.
Thank
It was avant-garde. It was cutting edge in every way. You and I reviewed that a few weeks ago. Yeah. So a season. Seasons, hey, you can quote me on this. Seasons change, and opera seasons change.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of factors going on. You have the Trump freeze on funding the arts, and you have other issues. Some of them involving government that is really beyond your control. But what are the factors that go into making a season? You have talent, you have an audience or not,
Mhm.
you have funding or not, you have a venue or not. All these factors, and you may not be able to control everything. So talk to us about the external factors that affect your decisions and your operations in creating a season.
Yeah. Well, there are many, as you can imagine. I mean, one of the biggest ones that's most pressing on my mind right now is where can we perform? That had never been an issue for the company before. Although when I arrived in 2019, there were the huge renovations to the whole Blaisdell campus was on the burner with Kirk Caldwell as mayor at the time, and the idea of it being closed, the whole campus being closed for 3 to 5 years. I was told that with a wink and a nod of you should prepare for that and say it's never going to happen. And so I did. We got right on the ground. My first month, we were going out to look at optional venues that are on the island, and I have to tell you, there are few and far between. The ones that best fit us are on college or high school campuses, and the limitations of those for time and scheduling are almost impossible to overcome. Either we can't have it for a couple weeks, which is what we need to do to mount an opera production, or we can't schedule it more than a month or two in advance of the performances, which is also impossible for us to deal with. It was an eye-opening experience. Obviously, we have the Hawaii Theater, but that stage is quite cramped. There's no backstage. There is an orchestra pit, but it's maybe 15 or 20 players, whereas Grand Opera, it's 60 to 70 players that you need for. And that's the Blaisdell pit is the only one on the island in the state that fits that size for a production. So it really is for us Blaisdell or nothing, and that has a lot of baggage with that. We are in the midst of coming out of what was supposed to be a year-long closure from July of 23 to July of 24, which ended up being, sorry, not really. I know they're in the final stages of doing a first tranche, a big tranche of work there. But we were supposed to be back well, first of all, we're going to be back last fall. That didn't happen. We're like, sure, February is fine. And then we pretty early on, well, probably April or May, realized from the city's information we were getting that February of 25 wasn't going to be possible. So we had to postpone a production that had been planned for this season, February of 25 to February 26. So it's been a lot of punting because of that singular issue. And it's not done there because they haven't done any of the ADA work to the space. They were supposed to redo the bathrooms on the front of the house closest to King Street. That didn't happen during this 18 plus months closure. So we're looking at another year, they've told us, of closure of the fall of 26 to the fall of 27 or something along those lines. We're working with them. They are good people stuck in a bad situation, I will say. They're working with us as best they can. We are very much hoping that our October 26th production can be at the Blaisdell campus because it's been planned for quite a few years and already got postponed once. And it's a co-production of an opera based on Stephen King's The Shining. And it really, again, will only fit in the Blaisdell campus, and it really needs to be done around Halloween for maximum interest in audience going. So that's the second part, if you will, of how we go into planning a season is what are people going to come to? Because we're a business after all, and we have to sell tickets. And that doesn't mean we're not pushing boundaries like with Stuck Elevator, but we also have to be mindful of doing things that will attract larger audiences. Like we have Carmen coming up in April, which will be, God is my witness, we'll be back at the Blaisdell Concert Hall. We know this because the symphony is going to be there a couple weeks before us in March. So if they can't, well, anyways, I'm 98.5% confident that Carmen will be at the Blaisdell. And casting, of course, we have, there's a lot of things that we have to look at budget wise, and casting impacts that. What can we cast locally? What do we have to bring in artists? Housing and airfare is quite expensive, and it's gotten more expensive post-COVID. So there's all of those elements to that. And, what balancing things that are popular with things that are of interest to me as an artist, to me as a general director of this company, things that I think are important to show. And it's not the medicine aspect of it. These are great pieces, but they are works that reflect our community here. And I unfortunately know that, diversity, equity, and inclusion has become anathema under this current administration, but I still believe firmly that art needs to reflect the communities we're serving. And that's not about paying lip service, but it's actually being a genuine relevance to our communities. And so things like An American Dream, which we did in October 23 about Japanese incarceration camps, Stuck Elevator dealing with the difficulties of immigration to this country. That was about China immigration. We have in the works part of this frozen NEA application process, which will hopefully unfreeze and support this. But we have commissioned our very first opera ever, and that is to be presented at the Blaisdell in May of 26. It is a work about Hawaiian story about Kauai Keoli, Kamehameha III, that era, an unsung hero, Timoteo Ha'ililio. But we can talk about that more maybe a little later. But it is a balancing act. We only do 3 productions a year. Some years 2 because we were forced to push something, but usually 3. And so they have to be diverse enough to be of interest, so people want to go to 2 or 3 of those and not just 1.
Yeah, and you do better with season tickets that way.
Yeah,
If you can
exactly.
offer them. Yeah.
Yeah. But
Well,
even
when I
within the confines of single tickets, which unfortunately are now 80% of what we sell, as opposed to it used to be 10, 15 years ago, 80% were subscribed. People are more likely to come back if it's something different, but of interest to them.
You must lose your hair worrying about this.
This has gone further back since I got here. And the gray you see here, I did not have that 5 years ago.
These are all points of uncertainty.
Yeah.
And you're juggling, all these factors together, and it must be maddening because it's each one is dependent on the other.
Yeah.
And if something fails on this end, then it's going to be a problem on that end.
Yeah, it's a huge domino game where one domino tips everything out of whack. And it's balancing budget, there's so many factors involved. And we rely on donations too. I mean, that's probably 70% plus of our income each year. And so, I have to be mindful of those patrons too, that to make sure they're engaged and enjoying what we're doing. Um, yeah, it's a lot of it's like a Jenga, and you pull one piece out and everything collapses. You're trying to not let that happen. Um, it is stressful. Luckily, I
Well,
I adore what I do, but it is a lot of stress.
well, but you have to, roll with the punches. You have to change with the changes and be creative. After all, that's your business to be creative. It's all about creativity, and creativity includes business creativity too, doesn't it?
Sure. Yeah.
So you've added some programs. You've changed focus in some ways outside of the season itself. Can you talk about the programs like Studio 101 and
Yeah.
what you did at Christmas, which I loved, what you did at Christmas? Talk about it.
Yeah, sure. So, one of the things that happened actually before COVID, we had I don't know if people know, but Hawaii Opera Theater was gifted the building we're in on Baratania Street. It's a leasehold, a freehold, and all that. Great building, 4 stories, and we've been in it for I don't know 20 years or so. For a very long time, a large retail space on the ground floor was occupied by the Bunton Gallery. And in December of 2019, they decided to reduce or stop operations. I understand they have a small gallery in Chinatown now, but they vacated the space. And we put it on the market because we also rely on some of the rental income that we get from tenants in the building. But ultimately decided to take it over because we had been renting a rehearsal space a few doors down on Baratania that was on the second floor with no elevator. We were forklifting set pieces up to the second floor. Not good. Couldn't do any public performances there because it's not accessible. So anyways, when we took over this space and then COVID hit, and it became this really boon for us. And thank goodness for Jamie Offenbach, who's our artistic director, who just built this whole season of digital creations, over 30 hours of original content that were all filmed right there in Studio 101, what we now call Studio 101. We set up green screen. We brought in, we all the COVID stuff we had to do with. It was a lot of. We became a mini film production station, and it was interesting, but growing. And I will say back to an earlier comment is like I love and hate the word pivot, and that's what we've been doing a lot. um, so anyways, out of that and Jamie's creativity came the idea of a regular series that could continue in Studio 101. We're calling it Studio 101 as a program, and it is a series of cabaret shows that are 1 hour in length, cocktail tables set up. We have a bar, open bar included with the price of tickets. Sometimes there's food available. And it's always about the power of the human voice. That is who we are as an opera company, is about the power of the human voice. So that has to be part of each of these elements. But beyond that, then becomes this wildly creative programming that Jamie puts together that meshes opera with hula and ballet and art songs and jazz, vocal jazz. And we're very fortunate to have some incredibly talented singers right here. The hallmarks of this program really have been mezzo-soprano Blythe Kelsey, who's on our staff. She's sister to Quinn Kelsey, who's this international opera star, of course, and Leslie Goldman, a really amazing soprano that just tears up the stage whenever she's on it. And we've also gained a couple of additional sopranos to the community, which we've been using some. Soprano Maria Valdez, who has been in a couple of our productions. She was here for Johnny Skiki a couple seasons ago, met and fell in love with a gentleman that works at the Marriott. And so she's relocated here. And so when she's not off performing with other opera companies, she is ours and we love her to death. And then, of course, Dane Lamb's wife. Dane Lamb is the music director at the symphony. His wife is a very fine soprano, Sophia Troncoso. She was in our Pagliacci last season and was in the holiday show this year with us here. And we love her to death too. It's a really great people to work with and super talented.
Yeah, you have some shows going forward. It caught my eye that Leslie Goldman's going to be a one woman show,
Yeah.
and in the Christmas show she was just fabulous. Talk about charisma. Talk
Oh my.
about magnetism. You know.
Yeah, no, she really is a force of nature on stage. It's you can't take her eyes off her. And it's not just because she's beautiful and has a great voice, but she has got a charisma to her, as you said. So she did a one woman show last year, which was all about her many failed loves, down from like first grade. It was very funny. And we even had pictures on the screen behind her of some of these kids. One, the first grader was like had a bowl cut that his mother had obviously done. It was very funny. But she talked and sang songs interwoven with that related to each of these particular relationships. And so this is volume 2 of that series called "Get Your Heart On." And so it will be you don't want to miss it. Leslie is just such a good storyteller. She's got an ease about her in talking, but also singing just great pieces. So that we're really looking forward to that. And then later in the month, actually the end of March, end of February, early March, we have Blythe Kelsey in a one-woman show too. And this is a voice for the ages. She can sing anything and everything, really a contralto. She's got this great, dark, deep voice, and but can sing opera, can sing vocal jazz, and being Hawaiian descent too, and she's a lot of experience with Hawaiian music, and so also just tears those up too. So we've got a lot of neat stuff coming.
So the season has been what Stuck Elevator was the first opera of the season,
Yeah,
which, as you know, I loved and it touched me in every way. God, if you could do that again, I told you before, if you could do
yeah,
that again and again, I'd come again and again.
yeah. I would definitely
But
love to
now
bring it back. I would love to bring it back. It's a great piece.
it's an important piece. And you know
Yeah,
what? It's more important every day in
yeah,
our very strange and troubled world.
it's sadly true, but yeah,
So then we're talking about Carmen. And I
yeah.
would like to take a few minutes with you about Carmen, about what you're going to do with Carmen and what Carmen means. But can we start with sort of an environmental look at Carmen? What's the story about, and how does the story relate to our current times?
So this the story focuses on Don Jose, who is in the military. He's left his mother and girlfriend back at home, and kind of has kept his head down. He's getting promotions and things, but he's lonely. And Carmen is a force of nature in their community. It's like all the women hate her and all the men want her, um, and so she's got a difficult relationship. But she also has, let's say, fears of commitment, um, and so is always on to her next conquest. And so while she's flirting with one guy at the very beginning of the opera, she sees Don Jose off to the side and thought, that could be my next one, and pours it all onto her. And she is such a charismatic figure that he melts. And very quickly, and because of an opera, you only have a few hours to tell an opera, very quickly, he falls head over heels with her. And that love becomes really an obsession. She breaks him in many ways, makes her, he gives up his career in the military for her. He pushes away his girlfriend, Michaela, who has come to give him a message from his mother, hoping he'll come home and be good and all that. And she is not successful. She cannot fight Carmen, this force of nature. I don't want to say something that's bad about her, but she is charismatic, I will say, and in a fatal way, unfortunately. But Carmen's love is fickle, and she does not like clinging, and Don Jose clings, and she quickly gets abused of him. And the next conquest is the visiting toreador Escamillo, who comes through town, and she falls head over heels in him, and he's also very charismatic. But like her, he has a different girl in every town, so this is not the of long-term relationship, and that's what she's looking for. Well, Don Jose sees red with all of this blood rage. He kills for her, and at the end of the day, he killed. Well, I don't want to get. Well, yeah, okay. I guess everybody knows. She dies at the end at his hands. He just can't stand the thought of losing her. He's given up everything for her, and she's throwing him away. And in a final desperate act of defiance, he stabs her.
It sounds like one of those movies on Netflix, you know, it ends in a dark ending.
Yeah, most operas do, unfortunately, and it's usually the girl that gets it, whether it's dying of consumption in La Boheme or other things, Violetta in Traviata, or launching off the parapet to escape Scarpia's henchmen in Tosca. The soprano in Carmen and Cimento, but the soprano usually does not end well. Often the tenor doesn't either.
You know, I have to say that my favorite character in the narrative that you described is Micaela,
Oh yeah,
because she's so sweet. It's a country
yeah,
girl, you know, plain and simple and loving, and it's tragedy that he can't connect with her.
yeah.
He's
He
got to
can't
go off and
see that
yeah,
true love, that caring is more than the passion,
yeah.
and yeah, and she also has one of the most beautiful arias in the whole opera that she sings to Don Jose in attempt to woo him. And I don't know how you can't melt hearing that aria because it's just so heartfelt, so simple, so naive, but so achingly beautiful.
Yeah. And I remember reading something some time ago that Bizet and the French in the 19th century, they saw the Spanish culture as one step below them.
Mhm.
They saw all this with the bullfighting, and the cigarette girls, you know, that whole life experience and the military as something that was just a step below them. And Bizet tried to bring that to the French audience. He
Mhm.
tried to show you something, you as a member of the French audience, that you hadn't seen before, an exploration of a foreign country.
Mhm. Yeah.
He's French, and the whole thing happens in Spain, and he's sort of crossing the Rubicon to help you understand what's going on down there. So,
Yeah.
am I right about that? Is this the way it was going on?
I think it definitely was a important piece for him and for the French public. It was well received at the very beginning. I mean, super powerful, but also some negativity of it. It was one of the first that showed such a visceral depiction of human interaction. So there was a lot of outrage about the murder of Carmen on stage, and there should be that, but that's what he wanted. I mean, it was a purposeful outrage, right? Like the Rite of Spring, the Stravinsky piece that had everybody in an uproar. But it's never really been out of the repertoire since it debuted because it's such a powerful piece. It's real people. Now, whether you believe it's real Spain and it's not, there's a lot of fancifulness of it, and there's some caricaturization of Spain and Spaniards. I mean, the fiery Spaniard woman sort of thing, that is a caricature, but there's a lot but they are real and within the context of that story.
It strikes me too that in the 19th century, you know, these countries were more separate than they are now. There was no EU.
Oh yeah.
The borders were, you know, different than they are today, than they have been.
There's no air
Um,
travel, and yeah.
so it's like a foreign country. It really is a foreign country in
Yeah,
the 19th
yeah.
century.
Very distinct personalities in each of these countries, and even within, and we still see this some now, but even within provinces of Spain or France or Italy, there were great distinctions. It wasn't some homogeneity, for all Spain is like all Spain, all France is all France,
What can we learn, if anything, about modern times for that are the things that are relevant to modern times from Carmen? I mean, there's always something because operas wouldn't last as long as they do
Uh,
without being relevant going forward. Your thoughts about that?
that there's something about opera, great art, that speaks to our human condition, and Carmen certainly does that, of an aspect of no matter how strong somebody appears outwardly, there is vulnerability inwardly. Carmen is ultimately vulnerable. She's broken in many ways of not being able to latch on to an affection, latch on to somebody that genuinely cares for her. Like Don Jose can't see the love that Michaela brings to him. There's an aspect of that I think is universal about not necessarily going after what you need as opposed to what you want, and thinking through on what long-term implications are this, yes, this passion for a moment, but it's the hotter the fire burns, the quicker it burns out, I think is a phrase. I'm misquoting something not from Carmen, but just generally, and that's certainly true in the opera. You can't, there's a flash in the pan sort of aspect to their relationship, and it goes out quickly, but Don Jose can't see it. And so, there's he it's a lot of broken characters. Escamillo, is the bravura. Um, but what's behind that? You actually don't learn a lot about him. He's kind of he's got two great arias, but it's also kind of not the most fleshed out character in the piece. It's really about Don Jose and Carmen and Michaela. Even you get more about her, and her own frailties, her wishes, wants, and fears for Don Jose, who she loves very much.
I'm thinking of the moth and the flame.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, or Icarus flying too high to.
Right. Well, now let's put it in context. How do you mount this production? What kind of lead do you need? Lead time? How do you deal with all those issues we discussed before? How is it going? It's in April, middle of April, so it's not too far away.
With any opera, any season, we're looking 2 to 3 years out, and even sometimes 4, depending on what the project is. So we've had Carmen cast for a good 2 years, and just some really amazing singers, including featuring Alice Chung in her role debut as Carmen, who was just such a fantastic Suzuki for us, and then she was Mama in American Dream. Great, big, powerful powerhouse voice and such a great actress. So anyway, so we built the cast around her really because we just wanted this role for her. So again, that's 2 years out, easy. We start, the conductor and the director working with them a good 18 months out on what the parameters are, any cuts that are going to be made to the score because it's a long opera. And then within the context of a season, what can we afford? And so, we have these gorgeous costumes from a 2017 production of Carmen. But because of budget constraints and all, we decided not to do a fully staged production. So it won't have sets, but it will have set pieces. And the orchestra is going to be on stage, which I think is really cool. So you'll get to hear and see the visceralness of that orchestration, and some of the unique orchestration that Bizet did to make it sound Spanish. But the performers down front, so they'll be even closer to you in the action. So there's an aspect of that is, I won't say better, it's different and has its own attractions. But everybody, the principals will all be costumed. The chorus will be mostly on risers in the back, but we are going to stage a handful of them into the action because there's a lot that goes on with the chorus. We are doing some new costumes for some of the principals, but the costumes for the chorus we'll be using in all are from our 2017 production, which was really gorgeous.
Okay, so staged means they sing on the stage in front of the orchestra.
And there'll be entrances and they'll act out all of the drama. So there'll be like a table and chairs and mugs and things, all those sorts of aspects of it being staged. It'll just be in front of the orchestra as opposed to a set piece.
No, that's not bad.
No.
I really can enjoy that.
We did that with La Boheme at the Waikiki Shell. That was forced more because you can't put a set on the Waikiki Shell and still have an orchestra there. But it was very, very effective. And with lighting and again the sets and the set pieces and costumes, it'll be a fully theatrical experience for everybody.
Yeah, you mentioned that the lead is a good actress. Well,
Yeah.
that's important. If you're going to do it that way, you want her to act.
Yeah. Yeah, and our tenor, Juan Wee Choi, he actually, I saw him in Don Jose, in the role of Don Jose at Minnesota Opera, and he is fantastic. just fantastic.
I remember the ABC operas. This is the
Mhm.
C of
It
ABC:
is, yes.
Aida, Bohème, and Carmen. Does this mean that you have a predictably greater interest in the community because it is an ABC opera?
Yeah, it luckily there's more than three. Tosca, I would add to that, Butterfly, Traviata. But yes, they are. This is something that's pretty much industry wide, that people come, most people, first time attendees come to something that's familiar, that's a popular title. They've heard of it, they've heard some of the music from it, maybe even if it was just in Bugs Bunny, or a film score. And so they think, I can go to that and see it. And what we as an opera company need to make sure is that it's the best possible thing they could see, so they want to go to a second one. But on the second one, they often go to something that's newer or less familiar, to see what about that's about. So this is why we have to create a balance in each season of not just having the ABC operas, but making sure there's those tent posts each season. That's something that people can grasp onto.
I can hardly wait. I actually can hardly wait. I'm sorry. That's the way it is for me.
Yeah, good, good. Yeah.
So let's talk about the seasons that followed. You talk about the lead time, so you must have a handle on in 26 or maybe even 27. What does it look like?
So we are still making some adjustments, mostly because of the second round of closures for the Blaisdell has thrown our 26-27 season out of the water. But we're looking at a concert in the fall of 26 with orchestra, and then the postponed Italian Girl in Algiers in an English adaptation, Riot Girl on Mars, that I'm directing. That'll be in February 2026.
Oh
Just
yeah.
it's a fantastic piece, and we've got a really great young cast for that. It is hysterically funny. If you want comic opera, this is like that. And then in May, as I mentioned before, we have our first ever commissioned opera, and it's called Kamalahua, the Sheltering Tree. Kamalahua is the Hawaiian middle name of Timoteo Ha'alilio. He was a childhood friend of Kauikeaoli, the Kamehameha III, and was friend all their life, and became a very close advisor of his. When it became clear that particularly British at that time were making moves to take over, that Kamehameha III decided he really needed to do more advocacy outreach to other nations to recognize Hawaii as a sovereign nation. And so he sent Timoteo along with William Richards, another close advisor and former missionary, off on this expedition to get acknowledgement from, and they went to the United States, went to Washington, they went to London, Paris, and Belgium, and they were successful, although not all written, but at least verbal agreements. The journey was amazing, and this story has almost been lost to history. It was lost to history until a really wonderful woman, Kaue Desai, was doing research on the sovereignty right now, and this name Timoteo kept popping up in articles and things, and so she finally, so she was the impetus for us telling this story. At least she was brought to the table by Patrick Kuakane, who's a Kumuhulu, who's going to be directing and choreographing the show. So anyways, it's a fantastic piece, fantastic story, beautiful, beautiful music. 60% at least is sung in Hawaiian. There will be hula, there will be Victorian costumes, because that's the era. Just a great piece, and it goes all around the world, to Paris and London and Washington, D.C. So the gist of the story, though, is so they send them off. We can't tell every bit of that journey, but the actual journey is that they sailed to Mexico, went across land to the Atlantic, and then continued their journey. Can you imagine how harrowing that would have been in the 1840s? But in any event, while they were gone, they did all the meetings and things. While they were gone, the Paulette affair happened, which is British Admiral Paulette, who forcibly overthrew the monarchy here. And of course Britain, while didn't particularly know this, but the Queen agreed to the sovereignty, and he stood down, but only because the American warships came in, predicting their own rights. But that's a different story. Um, Unfortunately, Timoteo succumbed to illness on the journey back home and passed away. And much like the story of Kalakaua, who was in, I guess, San Francisco and passed away and came back, and the people here didn't know he was dead until they saw the black sails coming in. That's the story here of Timoteo as well. And apparently, it was this great mourning that went up when William Richards came off the deck with a box behind him, and that's the end of the opera.
Oh, wow, that sounds so interesting. Really, and it sounds like it would be interesting in that same itinerary around the world to other
Yeah,
places. You know,
yeah,
people
yeah,
are
right.
they're always interested in that in Hawaiian history.
Well, and what's interesting, one of the scenes in the opera depicts this, but Timoteo was quite a cause célèbre in Paris, and particularly this dashing. He was quite handsome, and dressed in all the finery, and he was royalty. He was treated as royalty there, and he was like the darling of Parisian society while they were there. Um, it's an interesting story, and including some aspects of people assuming that William Richards was leading the expedition, and he would always very gently defer to Timoteo. It's like, this is the king's emissary, not me. I'm with him to help.
I think you're going to have a lot of interest in that. I
Yeah,
think that's going to be a fantastic production. A history making
yeah,
production is what
yeah, yeah.
it just strikes me from what you're saying is that we talked earlier about change
Mhm.
and rolling with the change, comporting with the change. Opera itself is changing in this country, and
Mhm.
I'm not familiar with it, but other countries do, I expect.
Yeah.
Where the cutting edge stories, cutting edge productions, the use of technology, as in Stuck Elevator,
Mhm.
all of those things are taking the art form forward. So how fast is it moving? How fast will it move? Is that a good thing?
Opera companies, the larger companies have a harder time moving fast than the smaller companies do. But opera as an art form is evolving very rapidly. You see a we're in like the golden age of particularly chamber operas, but it's just so much new content out there, new operas being written, more than really opera companies can produce right now. But it's just great to see the energy of these young composers and not so young composers who are turning to opera and as a really unique art form. Companies are feeling pressured to and rightly so, feeling pressured to be more relevant to the communities we're serving. And so you're seeing Spanish operas in communities that have a large Spanish population, um, Asian operas like we've been doing that speak to the Asian populations here across the gamut. I will say that Europe and Asia are more latched on to the historical repertoire, but even they are starting to produce new works, newly commissioned pieces. A lot of it bringing in American works to remount them there, sometimes translated into a local dialect, but often not. As far as stage machinery goes, that the benefit of digital, the projections or digital screens and things is you can change scenes rapidly without pause, and it tightens up the flow of productions and things without the please stay in your seats for 5 minutes while we frantically change the stage sort of thing. But I will say it doesn't save money. It's quite expensive. The designers that work in that are well paid, and rightly so. It's a lot of work. And the technology is expensive to get it to look right. We found that out during we found out how difficult it is on an island like this when we were doing the Secret Garden a few years back. It was one of the first shows we did coming out of COVID, and the local designer we work with, Dave Hunt, who's just fabulous. He created this visual imagery that needed 7 projectors, including projecting in the ceiling of the Blaisdell itself in the house of the concert hall there. And one of them broke down in
Oh no.
rehearsal, and a new one had to be flown in from the mainland. It came in from Los Angeles. It didn't arrive until 11 a.m. on opening day.
Oh,
Yeah, we had already remapped everything so it could just be the 2 projectors, but luckily it got put up that day and redone, and so we went flying with all 7 projectors working. But there's other challenges, right, that come in with that. But it is definitely um it's powerful. It engages, especially younger audiences, more than the flat scenery does. There's more. Usually, it's almost animated. The effect that you get from these imagery, like you saw in Stuck Elevator with the elevator closing and all the just fantastic digital imagery that was in that production.
Yeah, that was so realistic, and I was confused. I thought that was a regular, scene, a flat scene,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
no, it began to move on me.
Yeah, it was two large digital screens that were wedged together in slight angle to give a sense of a space for him in the elevator.
There's always concern about young people and whether they will, appreciate opera, follow opera, support opera, and all that. And so the changes you describe are probably of interest to them. But are they responding? Do you have a sense of whether the next generation will pick up on loving opera the way I do?
The jury is still out, but we are having some success. We have a lot of success. Actually, the ticket sales for Stuck Elevator were over 60% that had never been to one of our productions. The same was true for An American Dream. So I think these stories do have are resonating with a younger and more diverse audience than we've had in the past. But we are now in probably the third generation of young people that didn't have music in the schools, and that is making a profound difference, I think, in what they're interested in consuming, how they're consuming it. The availability of content on your phone is something we can't battle with. It's just overwhelming what you can just watch for free on your phone or your tablet or whatever. And so it's a challenge. We are having challenge bringing audiences back. We're still not to our pre-pandemic levels of participation. I'm very much hoping Carmen being back at the concert hall and being a very familiar title and with a beautiful cast will get us there. But it's a challenge.
Well, I'll be with you, Andrew.
Thank you, Jay. I
And
appreciate that.
we can promote that, later on, have another show
Yeah,
and drill down on
yeah.
some of the things you've touched on. But let me offer you a minute or two to speak to our audience today. I always enjoy the comments you make at the beginning of every opera where you go on the stage and offer a few thoughts about the opera and about HOT. But let me offer you that now. And what would you say to them?
Well, I would say that opera has a place in your lives. Opera is the most engaging art form there is. It is the most complete art form there is. You don't have to know anything about opera to enjoy opera. We have super titles above the stage that'll show you what the English is, translations if it's not in English. Even if it is in English, we put English super titles up so you can follow along with the story. We do very engaging productions that are really well sung, and just the power of the human voice is undeniable in how it touches and it touches our very soul. There's something about that unamplified or even amplified, like we've had to do in some of the larger spaces we've been in. But the power of the human voice is incomparable. There's something about it that is. I'm at a loss for words on that because it means so much to me and has all my life, as a singer, but also as a participant in active audience participant in vocal performances of one kind or another. Um, it doesn't cost a lot, and you should come.
I'll be there, and I
Thank
will
you.
be touched. I'm always emotionally affected by every single opera, every single one. I fall into it. I envelop myself in it, and I always
It's
enjoy it so
addictive.
much.
It's addictive, and it should be.
Andrew Morgan, General Director and CEO of Hawaii Opera Theater, an organization that I have been close with and have admired since way the 70s, when it was very early. Well, thank you, Andrew. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks, Jay. We love you.
And the same. Aloha.
Aloha.